Colonel Homer versus The Last Temptation of Homer, The Marriage Crisis Showdown. Both are great episodes, but you can only choose one. Which is the better episode? Colonel Homer and The Last Temptation of Homer are very similar in a lot of ways. They're both marriage crisis episodes, they both present a potential love interest for Homer, and they both deal with Homer's guilt in the situation. Heck, they even both start with a joke about narrow parking spaces. I mean, what's the likelihood of that? But they are also very different episodes too, both in execution and in focus. So if we're going to figure out which one is truly better, once and for all, let's take a look at both cases individually. We'll start with the earlier produced episode, Colonel Homer. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the main reason why Colonel Homer is the superior episode is because it has a better story. Not to say that the other episode's story is bad or anything, it's just not as fully developed as the one in Colonel Homer. The other episode has to fit in a B-plot, which is a decent one and all, but it limits how much you can do with the main storyline. Colonel Homer feels a little more focused overall, establishing the Homer and Marge conflict at the movies and building from there. The other episode just kinda pushes Marge aside and makes it a Homer-only affair. In a marriage crisis episode told from the point of view of the husband, you have to demonstrate what the relationship is like with the wife. The other episode takes their strong relationship as a given. Colonel Homer actually shows it. It presents a very oblivious and naive version of Homer, who doesn't really get how much this bothers Marge, even when she repeatedly tells him. The structure is a little like Homer's version of life on the fast lane, starting out pretty innocently, but then becoming a real decision. I like that Colonel Homer is much more straightforward about this decision, building up the stakes of the situation, and then actually showing him say goodbye to Lurleen. The ending of the other episode always felt a little off to me, to be honest. I love this scene, but the way that Marge appears out of nowhere always felt a little rushed to me. I'm not sure how they could fix this other than maybe setting up Marge a little more in advance. Call me sentimental if you want, but I like seeing Homer return to his wife in that cowboy hat. All those romantic zoom-ins on their faces and stuff. Since they do such a great job of building up the conflict, the final resolution ends up being very cathartic. And if you're not convinced by the story alone, I present to you Exhibit B. Lurleen Lumpkin is a better character than Mindy Simmons. Once again, I'd like to take a moment to underline that I don't think Mindy is a bad character, I just think that Lurleen is more interesting and is better characterized. The reason we like Mindy are the same reasons we like Homer. She's essentially just a reflection of his character, almost a plot device for simulating Homer's perfect woman. Lurleen, on the other hand, is a much more complex and realistic character. She is somewhat sympathetic, especially watching her work her crappy waitress job, and she genuinely seems to love the wild ride that Homer is taking her on. But at the same time, Lurleen is way more deliberate in her advances, and is very cavalier about the fact that Homer is married. I mean, the first time we see her, she's singing, "Your wife don't understand you, but I do." Yeah, pretty sketchy song there, Lurleen. So while I do think that Mindy is a better person than Lurleen, in a moral sense at least, Lurleen is the greater marriage threat because she is legitimately chasing after Homer. But the thing that puts Colonel Homer over the top is its music. The music is actually its ace in the hole in a lot of respects, the component that makes this episode truly unique. The Simpsons actually have a great track record for parodying country music. They always seem to hit that balance of being ridiculous and silly, but also sounding genuinely rustic and charming. A lot of Lurleen's songs seem to come out of the big book of country music cliches, but you still get the appeal of the music itself. Alf Clausen's score provides some nice accompaniment too. I love the rising strings during Bunk With Me Tonight. It's very tonight, you know? It's tough to do these marriage crisis episodes and realistically convey the romantic tension between the characters. The music adds a lot to the atmosphere that the other episode just can't compete with. The music drives the story, it frames the story, and it ends the story. It's wonderful stuff. And with that, the case for Colonel Homer is closed. Now let's move on to the case for The Last Temptation of Homer. Okay, this argument is very straightforward. The Last Temptation of Homer is the superior episode because it is much funnier than the other one. The Simpsons is a comedy, therefore the quality of the jokes should be an important factor. Now I don't really like to explain jokes or list them because frankly that's the most tedious thing in the world, but we'll go over the highlights. The Last Temptation of Homer has the giant tube. It has the money fights. It has Zootroy and Stuart the Duck. It has the Mindy fantasies. It has Joey Jojo, the bar napkin, Colonel Klink, the giant hand, the fortune cookie. I could go on and on and on. Now don't get me wrong, the other episode definitely does have a lot of good jokes in it. I mean, it's the "it takes two to lie, one to lie, and one to listen" episode after all. And the hee haw parody is great. But The Last Temptation of Homer is just relentlessly funny all the way through. There's a streak of Last Exit to Springfield in this one, where they supplement the main story with a ton of Mr. Burns doing Mr. Burns things. The difference between the jokes are very Season 3 versus Season 5, if you know what I mean. Season 3's jokes are a little more character-driven, a little more down-to-earth, a little more observational. Nothing wrong with that, of course. Season 3 is one of my favorites, actually. But comparing these two episodes side by side, it's hard to deny how hard-hitting the jokes are in the later episode. Secondly, The Last Temptation of Homer is better because it is more meta and more high concept. It's like the thinking man's approach to a marriage crisis episode. It isn't really that interested in developing Mindy as a unique character, because that's not really the point. The point is that the universe is playing a big cosmic joke on Homer, that he is being manipulated into a supposedly predetermined outcome. Mindy is who she is because that's what would tempt Homer the most. That's it. It's basically Homer and the terrible, horrible, no good, very erotic dig. The other episode plays the whole thing straight, introducing a homewrecker who basically needs to be shoved aside at the conclusion. The Last Temptation of Homer is a little more nuanced and interesting, portraying Homer as knowing exactly what is happening and is trying desperately to be a good person. How does one continue to be a faithful husband when the entire world is telling you not to be? It's an interesting question. And finally, as echoed in my 60-second Simpsons review, The Last Temptation of Homer is the superior episode because it manages to get rid of Charlie, who has been dragging the series down since the very beginning. I don't care if he's in a bunch of episodes afterwards, it's just nice to see him get what he deserves. He's just a poor man's Lenny, I tell you. And with that final, and possibly most important piece of evidence, the case for The Last Temptation of Homer is closed. Let's go to the verdict. So I've given you two very, very convincing arguments for each of them, and it's time to make a final decision. For me, it kinda comes down to the classic story versus humor decision. I don't want to boil it down to just that, because both episodes do fine at both categories, but I feel like The Last Temptation of Homer has a significant advantage with its jokes, and I wonder if Colonel Homer fully makes up for it with its strong characters and atmospheric storytelling. Last Temptation is saddled with a just okay B-plot, whereas Colonel Homer uses that extra time to make sure it earns that heartwarming ending. Funny jokes often fade over time, whereas a great story usually sticks with you a lot longer. This is a super close call for me, but in the end, if I had to pick one, I think I have to go with The Last Temptation of Homer. Not just because of the jokes, but because of its unique spin on such a common story. There's always an air of inevitability to these kind of things, that we're marching toward Homer getting back together with Marge. And while Colonel Homer takes us on that journey in a more charming and complete way, I like how Last Temptation pushes the envelope. We would probably need the entire world to conspire in order to manipulate Homer into cheating. So would he actually do it? I think it says just a little more about Homer Simpson as a man and a husband. So in the end, humor and the high concept rules the day. The Last Temptation of Homer is the superior episode. And if you don't like it, you can always file an appeal. But for now, this case is closed.